Hello, everyone. If you enjoy my channel, please support me with one like, one subscribe, and one share.
My husband walked away. Have you ever watched the person you loved close the front door and suddenly realize they might never walk back through it again? Sometimes it arrives with one suitcase, one gentle goodbye, and one handwritten note left on the kitchen table. 3 years ago, I believed my marriage had ended in exactly that way. I thought my husband had stopped loving me. I thought he had chosen freedom over family. Most of all, I thought I would never forgive him. But if you stay with me until the end of the story, you'll discover why the day he left wasn't actually the end of our marriage. It was the beginning of a truth neither of us was ready to face. My name is Emily, and this is the story I never thought I would have the courage to tell. We lived in a quiet suburb outside Minneapolis, where every street looked peaceful and every front yard seemed perfectly cared for. From the outside, our family looked like the picture of the American dream. We had 2 wonderful children, a comfortable home, weekend barbecues with neighbors, and family movie nights almost every Friday. Friends often smiled and said, "You two are relationship goals." Every time I heard those words, I forced myself to smile back. What they couldn't see was the distance quietly growing between us after the children fell asleep each night. We weren't fighting. In some ways, I wished we had been. At least arguments would have meant we were still trying to understand each other. Instead, we became experts at pretending everything was fine. Every morning sounded exactly the same. Coffee. Sure. Have a good day. You too. Those 4 short sentences slowly replaced the long conversations we used to have. Sometimes the most dangerous thing in a marriage isn't anger. It's routine. Psychologists often explain that the human brain naturally adapts to familiar experiences. It's called hedonic adaptation. Over time, people stop noticing the extraordinary things they once appreciated. The same thing can happen in relationships. We stop saying thank you. We stop asking meaningful questions. We assume tomorrow will always be there. Looking back now, I realize our love didn't disappear overnight. It slowly fell asleep while we were busy living ordinary life. Around that time, I started learning English more seriously. Every evening, after putting the children to bed, I listened to slow English stories while washing dishes. They helped me relax. Sometimes I repeated simple sentences aloud just to improve my pronunciation. One phrase stayed with me. Small steps create big changes. I believed those words only applied to learning a language. I had no idea they also applied to marriage. Unfortunately, I learned that lesson much later. One rainy Tuesday morning, everything changed. I walked downstairs expecting another ordinary day. The coffee maker was still warm. My husband's favorite mug sat beside the sink. His car keys were gone. At first, nothing felt unusual. Then I noticed a white envelope lying neatly beside my phone. My name was written across the front in his handwriting. Suddenly, my stomach tightened. I opened it with shaking hands. Inside was only one sheet of paper. There were no long explanations.
No questions.
No promises to return. Just one sentence.
I'm sorry.
I can't stay anymore. I read those words again and again, hoping they would somehow change. They never did. I ran upstairs, calling his name. The bedroom closet was half empty. His suitcase was gone. The jacket he wore every winter had disappeared. My heart pounded so loudly, I could barely think. My daughter walked into the hallway rubbing her eyes and asked the question that shattered me completely. Mom, where's Dad? Every call went straight to voicemail. I sent messages that were never answered. Hours became days. Days became weeks. Friends tried to comfort me, saying maybe he simply needed space. But deep inside, I believed something much darker. I convinced myself he had found someone else. Every lonely evening, my imagination filled the silence with painful stories. Research shows that when people don't have enough information, the brain automatically creates explanations to reduce uncertainty. Sadly, those explanations are usually negative. Mine certainly were. I wasn't searching for the truth anymore. I was collecting reasons to hate the man I once loved. Then, exactly 29 days after he disappeared, I opened our mailbox expecting another stack of bills. And taped to the back was a single train ticket with tomorrow's date and one handwritten sentence that made my entire body freeze. If you want the truth, meet me here alone. The life he left behind. What would you do if the person who broke your heart suddenly asked you to meet them again? Would you go because you still love them, or would you stay away because the pain is too deep? I stood in my kitchen holding that train ticket for almost an hour, fighting a battle between my heart and my memories. One voice inside me whispered, "You need answers." Another voice screamed, "Don't let him hurt you again." I had no idea I was about to discover a truth that would change the way I saw him forever. The next morning, I drove to a small coffee shop near the train station in downtown Minneapolis. It was a place we used to visit before life became complicated. The smell of fresh coffee filled the room. Everyone looked like they belonged somewhere. I sat in the corner, holding my coffee cup with both hands because my fingers were shaking. For 30 minutes, I waited. Every time the door opened, my heart jumped. Then finally he walked in. My husband, Daniel. He looked different. Not because he had changed physically, but because the confidence I used to see in him was gone. His shoulders looked heavier. His eyes looked tired. For a few seconds, we simply stared at each other. It was strange seeing someone who had once been my whole world suddenly feel like a stranger. He sat across from me and quietly said, "Thank you for coming." I wanted to be angry. I wanted to ask 100 questions. I wanted to tell him how many nights I cried while our children asked when Daddy would come home. But when I looked into his eyes, I saw something I didn't expect.
Pain.
Real pain. "Why did you leave?" I finally asked. My voice was calm, but my heart was breaking. He looked down at the table and took a deep breath. "Because I thought staying was hurting you more than leaving." Those words confused me. I almost laughed because they sounded impossible. How could leaving your wife and children be an act of love? How could disappearing be considered protection? But then he started explaining something I never knew. For almost a year before he left, Daniel had been struggling with a deep feeling of failure. He believed he wasn't a good enough husband or father. He worked longer hours because he wanted to provide more for our family, but the more he worked, the more distant we became. He noticed my sadness but didn't know how to fix it. He saw my tired face every evening and thought, "I am the reason she is unhappy." Instead of talking to me, he became quieter. Instead of asking for help, he carried everything alone. Looking back, I realized we were both trapped in the same problem. We were hurting, but we were hiding our pain from each other. Relationship experts often explain that emotional avoidance is one of the biggest dangers in long-term relationships. When people avoid difficult conversations, they don't remove the problem. They simply give the problem more time to grow. It becomes like a small crack in a window. At first, you barely notice it, but if you ignore it long enough, one day the entire glass can break. During our conversation, Daniel reached into his bag and placed something on the table. It was a notebook. "I wrote everything down because I couldn't say it," he explained. Inside were pages filled with his thoughts from the months before he left. Some pages were about our children.
Some were about me.
Some were about his fears. One sentence made my eyes fill with tears. "I miss my family every day, but I don't know how to come back as the man they deserve." I looked away because I didn't want him to see me crying. Part of me still felt angry. Another part of me remembered the man who used to dance with our children in the living room and make breakfast every Sunday morning. The human heart is confusing. It can hold love and pain at the same time. That afternoon, before we left the coffee shop, Daniel said something I never expected. "I didn't come back to ask you to forgive me today." I looked at him, surprised. "Then why are you here?" He slowly placed another envelope on the table. "Because before you decide if you can ever forgive me, you need to know the real reason I left." My hands froze before touching it. I knew whatever was inside that envelope would either destroy the last hope I had, or finally explain the mystery that had haunted me for an entire year. The truth behind his goodbye. Sometimes the person who hurts you the most is also the person who is silently fighting a battle you never knew existed. Have you ever judged someone's actions without knowing the pain behind them?
I did.
I believed my husband left because he stopped loving me. I believed he chose a life without us. But when I opened that envelope, I discovered a truth so painful that I wished I had asked one simple question before letting anger control my heart. What were you really going through? I held the envelope in my hands for several minutes before opening it. The coffee shop around me continued moving like nothing had happened. A young couple laughed near the window. A barista called someone's name. Cars passed outside on the busy American street. The world kept going, but my heart felt frozen. I slowly pulled out the papers inside. The first page was not a letter from another woman. It was not a divorce document. It was a medical report. My eyes moved across the words, but my brain refused to understand them. Then I saw Daniel's name. My breathing stopped. The report explained that months before he left, he had been diagnosed with severe anxiety and emotional burnout. He had hidden it from everyone, including me. Suddenly, memories I had ignored started coming back. The nights he stayed awake after everyone went to sleep. The mornings when he looked exhausted before leaving for work. The moments when he sat quietly at the dinner table while pretending everything was okay. I had thought he was becoming cold. I thought he didn't care. But maybe he was simply drowning silently. "Why didn't you tell me?" I whispered. Daniel looked down. "Because I was ashamed." That answer broke something inside me. We often imagine strong people as those who never fall apart. But the truth is, many people who appear strongest are often carrying the heaviest invisible weight. Psychologists explain that emotional struggles can make people withdraw because they fear becoming a burden to others. Instead of saying, "I need help," they say, "I'm fine." And sometimes that small sentence creates a huge distance between people who love each other. Daniel explained that every day before leaving home, he practiced a smile in the mirror. He wanted our children to see a happy father. He wanted me to see a reliable husband. But pretending became exhausting. The more he hid his pain, the more alone he felt. The more alone he felt, the harder it became to come home and explain. It was a painful cycle that neither of us knew how to break. As I listened, I remembered my own mistakes. I wasn't only a victim in this story. I had also built walls. When Daniel became quieter, I became colder. When he stopped talking, I stopped asking questions. We were both waiting for the other person to make the first move. It was like two people standing on opposite sides of a bridge, both hoping the other would walk first. The bridge never broke because we didn't love each other. It almost broke because we were both afraid. That realization changed something inside me. I had spent months learning English through slow stories and repeating simple sentences because I wanted to become more confident. One sentence I practiced often was, "Communication creates connection." I always thought it was only about improving my English speaking skills. Now, I understood it was also about relationships. The right words, spoken at the right time, can save something precious. Daniel opened another page from the notebook. This time, his hands were shaking. There is one more thing you need to know, he said. This is the real reason I couldn't come back. My heart immediately became heavy again. I thought the medical report was the biggest secret. I was wrong. He turned the notebook toward me. On the page was a photograph of our children sleeping on the couch. Under the picture, he had written one sentence. I left because I was afraid I would become like my father. I looked at him, confused. What does that mean? Daniel took a deep breath. His eyes became wet. I never told you what happened in my childhood. For the first time in our entire marriage, I saw a part of my husband that he had hidden from everyone. A painful memory. A family secret. A wound that had shaped every decision he made as a husband and father. Then he said 6 words that completely changed how I understood the man who walked away from me. I was trying to protect you. The childhood secret he hid. Have you ever discovered that the person you blamed for breaking your heart was actually fighting a battle that started long before you ever met them? I thought my husband left because he was selfish. I thought he abandoned us because he wanted an easier life. But sitting across from him in that quiet coffee shop, I learned something that completely changed my understanding of love. Sometimes people run away not because they don't care, but because they are terrified of hurting the people they care about the most. Daniel looked at me for a long moment before he began telling his story. The noise of the coffee shop seemed to disappear. I could still hear cups moving, people talking, and cars driving outside, but my attention was completely on him. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at him as the man who left me. I was looking at him as a person carrying a story I had never heard. When I was a child, he said quietly, I promised myself I would never become my father. I listened carefully as he explained what his childhood had been like. His father was not always a bad person, but he was a man who never learned how to handle his emotions. When life became difficult, he became distant. When problems appeared, he avoided them. He was physically present, but emotionally absent. Daniel remembered sitting at the dinner table as a little boy, watching his mother cry silently while his father stared at his phone. He remembered asking himself, why doesn't Dad care? Those memories stayed with him for decades. I thought I was different, Daniel said. I thought because I love my family, I would automatically know how to be a good husband and father. His voice became softer. But when I started feeling overwhelmed, I did the same thing my father did. I disappeared emotionally before I disappeared physically. Those words hurt because they were true. I suddenly remembered all the moments I had misunderstood. The evenings when he sat alone in the garage. The weekends when he said he was tired and needed space. The times I thought he was choosing work over us. Maybe he wasn't running away from our family. Maybe he was running away from the fear of becoming someone he hated. This was the moment I realized something important about relationships. We often judge people's actions without understanding the stories behind them. A person who seems angry may be afraid. A person who seems cold may be hurt. A person who seems distant may be fighting a private battle. This doesn't mean every painful action should be ignored. It means understanding creates the possibility of healing. Psychologists often talk about emotional patterns passed through generations. Many people unknowingly repeat behaviors they learned during childhood, even when they promised themselves they would never do the same things. The good news is that patterns can be changed. Awareness is the first step. Small choices repeated every day can create a completely different future. Listening to Daniel that afternoon reminded me of my own English learning journey. When I first started practicing English speaking, I was afraid of making mistakes. I would repeat simple sentences quietly because I worried people would laugh at my pronunciation. But slowly, I learned that mistakes were not proof of failure. They were proof that I was learning. Marriage was the same. We had both made mistakes, but mistakes did not have to become our final story. Daniel reached into his notebook and showed me another page. It was filled with sentences he had written after leaving home. One sentence made my eyes fill with tears. I miss my wife, but I don't know if she can forgive the man I became. I looked at him and finally asked the question I had been afraid to ask for months. Daniel, if you missed us so much, why didn't you come home? He looked toward the window for a few seconds. Then he answered with a sentence I never expected. Because before I came back to you, I needed to learn how to come back to myself. I didn't fully understand what he meant.
Not yet.
But then he explained that during the year we were apart, something happened that forced him to face everything he had been running from. He didn't just leave our home. He had left behind an old version of himself. He had entered a place where he had to confront his fears, his mistakes, and the man he wanted to become. Then he slowly pushed another document across the table. This time, it wasn't a medical report. It wasn't a letter. It was a photograph that made my heart stop. It showed Daniel standing somewhere I had never seen before, holding something that belonged to our family. And underneath the photo were 3 words written by his hand. The final goodbye. The man who came back. What if the person you thought you lost forever was actually fighting to become someone worthy of coming home? Have you ever closed a door because you were hurt, only to discover later that the person outside that door was changing in ways you never knew? I thought Daniel's return was too late. I thought some mistakes were too painful to forgive. But when I saw what he had done during the year we were apart, I had to ask myself a difficult question. Was I protecting my heart? Or was I refusing to see the truth? I looked at the photograph on the table and felt my hands become cold. It showed Daniel standing in front of a small community center in our city. Behind him was a sign that said, Family Support Program. I stared at the image because I had passed that building many times, but I never imagined my husband would be there. What is this? I asked. Daniel took a deep breath before answering. After I left, I realized I couldn't just say sorry and expect everything to be fixed. I needed to change. For months, I believed he was somewhere living a new life without us. I imagined him enjoying freedom while I was struggling to explain to our children why their father wasn't home. But the truth was completely different. After leaving, Daniel moved into a small apartment near his workplace. It was not comfortable. The furniture was simple. The kitchen had only a few dishes. The walls were empty. But according to him, that quiet place forced him to face himself. There was no family noise to distract him. No busy schedule to hide behind.
No excuses.
Only him and the thoughts he had avoided for years. He started attending counseling sessions. He joined a support group for men learning how to communicate better with their families. He volunteered every weekend at the community center in the photograph. I needed to understand why I ran away instead of asking for help, he said. I needed to learn that being a strong husband doesn't mean carrying everything alone. Those words touched me because they were the exact words I needed to hear months earlier. I had always believed strength meant never breaking. But maybe real strength was having the courage to admit when you were broken. The strange thing about forgiveness is that people often think it means saying, "What happened was okay." It doesn't. Forgiveness means saying, "What happened hurt me, but I don't want this pain to control my future." Many relationship researchers explain that healing after a major conflict requires 2 things, accountability and change. Without accountability, apologies feel empty. Without change, promises become repeated disappointments. Daniel wasn't just asking me to believe his words. He was showing me his actions. He showed me a notebook filled with things he had learned. Some pages contained notes from counseling. Some contained reminders about being more present with our children. One page had a sentence written in large letters. Listen first. Explain later. I almost smiled because that was something I had begged him to do for years. But now he was finally learning it. Sitting there, I also had to face my own truth. During the year he was gone, I had changed too. I became more independent. I learned to make decisions alone. I learned to handle difficult days without waiting for someone else to save me. I even became more confident with my English practice. Every morning, I listened to slow English stories while preparing breakfast. I repeated phrases like, I am stronger than yesterday, and I can create a better future. At first, those sentences were only language exercises. Later, they became personal promises. Learning English taught me something important. Improvement happens through small daily practice. You don't wake up one morning suddenly fluent. You build confidence one sentence at a time. Maybe relationships work the same way. You don't rebuild trust in one conversation. You rebuild it through hundreds of small choices. When our meeting ended, Daniel didn't ask me to come back home. He didn't pressure me. He simply said, I know I hurt you. If you never forgive me, I will understand. But I want you to know that I am no longer running away. Those words stayed in my mind for days. Part of me wanted to believe him. Another part of me was terrified. Because forgiving him meant opening the door to the possibility of being hurt again. And I wasn't sure my heart was ready for that risk. 3 weeks later, something unexpected happened. My daughter came into my room holding an old family photo. She looked at me and asked a question that completely changed the way I looked at Daniel's return.
Mom.
If Dad really changed, why are we the only ones who haven't given him a chance? What our children really wanted. Have you ever noticed that children can sometimes understand love better than adults? We spend years learning how to protect our hearts, build walls, and hide our emotions, while children simply ask the one question that matters most. Do you still love each other? When my daughter asked me why we were the only ones who had not given Daniel a chance, I felt a pain I couldn't explain. I thought I was protecting my children from another heartbreak. But what if my fear was actually preventing them from healing? I sat on the edge of my bed holding the old family photo my daughter had brought to me. It was taken during one of our happiest summers. Daniel was holding our son on his shoulders, and I was laughing beside them. Looking at that picture felt strange because it showed a family that seemed so far away from the broken family we had become. Mom, my daughter asked again, do you hate Dad? Her question shocked me. Children are incredibly honest. They don't always choose the perfect words, but they often touch the exact place adults try to avoid. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't answer immediately. Did I hate him?
No.
I was hurt. I was angry. I was disappointed. But hate was not the truth. The truth was much more complicated. I still loved the man who had hurt me, and admitting that felt almost impossible. The following weekend, I decided to meet Daniel with our children at a local park. It was a beautiful summer afternoon in Minnesota. Families were having picnics. Children were riding bicycles, and the sound of laughter filled the air. It was an ordinary American weekend, but for my family, it felt like a life-changing moment. When Daniel arrived, he looked nervous. More nervous than I had ever seen him. He brought a small bag with snacks and a soccer ball because he remembered our son loved playing soccer. The children ran toward him immediately. They didn't ask about the past. They didn't demand explanations. They simply wanted their father to play with them. Watching that moment was painful and beautiful at the same time. I realized children don't think about relationships the way adults do. Adults often focus on mistakes, promises, and fears. Children focus on connection. They remember bedtime stories, silly jokes, and the feeling of being loved. During that afternoon, Daniel didn't try to prove he was a perfect father. He just showed up. He listened. He played. He laughed. He apologized when our son asked why he left. "I made a mistake," Daniel said. "I thought leaving would protect everyone, but I was wrong. I should have talked instead." That sentence stayed with me because it was the first time I heard him take complete responsibility without making excuses. In relationships, accountability is powerful because it tells the other person, your pain matters. Experts often explain that children are affected not only by conflict between parents, but also by how parents handle conflict. A family doesn't need to be perfect to be healthy. It needs honesty, respect, and emotional safety. That day, I also learned something about my own healing. I had spent so much energy asking, why did he leave? But I had not asked another important question. Who do I want to become after this experience? While Daniel was rebuilding himself, I was rebuilding myself too. I continued my English practice every morning. I listened to slow English stories while drinking coffee before the children woke up. One phrase I practiced often was, healing takes time, but every step matters. I liked that sentence because it reminded me that progress doesn't need to be dramatic. Whether learning a language or repairing a relationship, small steps create big changes. A few weeks after that park visit, something surprising happened. Our son came to me and said, "Mom, Dad smiles more now." I looked at him and asked, "What do you mean?" He answered, "Before, Dad was here, but his mind was somewhere else. Now he is really here." Those words were simple, but they hit me deeply. My son had noticed something I had missed. Daniel wasn't just coming back to our family. He was finally becoming present. That night, I opened my journal and wrote a question I had avoided for months. Can I forgive a person who hurt me if they are truly becoming better? I stared at that sentence for a long time, because forgiving Daniel meant accepting that our old marriage was gone. We couldn't return to who we were before. Maybe that was not a bad thing. Maybe some things have to break before they can be rebuilt stronger. But just when I started believing we might have a second chance, Daniel called me one evening with a voice I had never heard before. He sounded worried. He said there was something about the time he was away that he had never told me. Something he was afraid would change everything between us again. The choice between pain and forgiveness. The hardest decision in life is not always choosing between right and wrong. Sometimes, it is choosing between the pain you know and the hope you are afraid to believe in. After my husband left, I spent months telling myself I would never forgive him. I thought forgiveness would mean I was weak. I thought letting him back into my life meant forgetting everything he had done. But one phone call changed everything. Daniel had another truth to tell me, and this time, I wasn't sure if my heart was strong enough to hear it. The evening Daniel called, I was sitting at the kitchen table after my children went to bed. The house was quiet, but my mind was not. I had learned that silence can be peaceful, but it can also bring back memories you try to hide. I looked at the empty chair across from me and remembered all the dinners when Daniel sat there. For a moment, I missed him. Then another memory appeared. The morning I found his letter. The empty closet. The fear on my daughter's face. My heart immediately built a wall again. When Daniel arrived at my house, he stood outside the door for several seconds before knocking. That small moment told me something. The old Daniel would have walked in confidently. The new Daniel waited because he understood that trust was no longer automatic. I opened the door and he quietly said, "Thank you for letting me come." We sat in the living room, the same place where we once watched movies as a family. But that night, there was no movie.
No laughter.
Only two people trying to understand the damage between them. Daniel looked nervous. "There is something I never told you," he said. I prepared myself for another painful surprise. While I was away, I almost gave up completely. I listened carefully as he explained that after leaving, he reached a point where he felt completely lost. He had a job, a place to live, and everything people thought he needed to be successful. But he felt empty. He realized he had spent years running from his fears instead of facing them. Then he showed me a small notebook. Inside were pages filled with letters he wrote to me, but never sent. Some were angry. Some were emotional. Some were apologies. One sentence made me stop breathing. I left because I was afraid of losing my family, but leaving was the thing that hurt my family the most. Tears filled my eyes because that sentence explained the tragedy of our marriage. We both wanted to protect our family, but we used the wrong methods. He ran away. I built walls. We were both fighting for love while accidentally creating more distance. Many relationship experts explain that forgiveness is not a single moment. It is a process that involves understanding, boundaries, and rebuilding trust through consistent actions. Forgiving someone does not mean accepting harmful behavior. It means deciding that your future deserves more attention than your past pain. That idea helped me during my healing journey. It was similar to learning English. When I first practiced speaking, I wanted every sentence to be perfect. I was afraid of making mistakes. But I learned that fluency comes when you keep speaking, even when your grammar is not perfect. Relationships are similar. Healing does not require perfect people. It requires honest people willing to keep trying. I looked at Daniel and asked the question that had been sitting in my heart for months. How do I know you won't leave again? He didn't answer quickly. He didn't give me a beautiful speech. Instead, he said something simple. You don't know. And I understand why you don't trust me yet. I can't change the past. I can only show you who I am today. That answer surprised me because it wasn't a promise. It was responsibility. For the first time, I didn't feel like Daniel was trying to convince me. He was accepting the consequences of his choices. Over the next few months, we didn't magically become the perfect family from movies. Real life doesn't work that way. We had difficult conversations. We disagreed. Sometimes old pain returned. But something changed. We stopped trying to win arguments and started trying to understand each other. One evening, while we were walking through our neighborhood, Daniel stopped near our old house and looked at me. I know I don't deserve another chance, he said. But if you give me one, I won't waste it. I wanted to answer immediately.
Part of me wanted to say yes.
Another part still remembered the pain. Then something unexpected happened. My daughter came running outside holding a small box she had found while cleaning her room. She handed it to me and said, Mom, I think this belongs to you. Inside the box was something I hadn't seen in years. Something from the beginning of my marriage with Daniel. And the moment I saw it, I realized I had been holding on to the wrong memory all this time. Building a new marriage. What if the person you thought you lost was not the same person who came back? What if the real question was not, can I forgive him, but can we build something better than what we had before? For a long time, I believed my marriage was a broken house that could never be repaired. But I slowly discovered something surprising. Sometimes you don't rebuild a home by fixing the old walls. Sometimes you rebuild it by creating a completely new foundation. And that was exactly what Daniel and I had to learn. I opened the small box my daughter gave me and immediately recognized it. Inside was an old collection of handwritten notes from the first year Daniel and I were married. They were simple things. Small messages we used to leave for each other before work. Have a beautiful day. I love you. Thank you for making me laugh. Looking at those little pieces of paper felt like opening a door to another version of ourselves. We were younger then. We had fewer responsibilities. We believed love alone could solve every problem. But life taught us something important. Love is not only a feeling. Love is a daily decision. It is choosing kindness when you are tired. It is choosing communication when silence feels easier. It is choosing to stay emotionally present even when life becomes difficult. I showed the notes to Daniel, and he smiled sadly. I remember writing those, he said. I thought loving you would always feel easy. I nodded because I understood exactly what he meant. Nobody teaches you that marriage is not only about romantic moments. Nobody tells you that there will be days when you feel like roommates instead of soulmates. There will be stressful mornings, unexpected bills, parenting challenges, and moments when two good people accidentally hurt each other. The difference between couples who survive and couples who give up is often not the amount of problems they face. It is how they handle those problems together. Daniel and I decided not to return to our old marriage. We decided to create a new one. That meant starting with small changes. Every evening, we spent 15 minutes talking without phones. No television.
No distractions.
Just two people asking simple questions. How was your day? What made you happy today? What was difficult? At first, it felt strange. After so much silence, even normal conversations felt uncomfortable. But slowly, those 15 minutes became the most important part of our day. I also noticed changes in myself. Before, I always wanted Daniel to prove he had changed. But I realized I also needed to change. I had become someone who protected herself by expecting disappointment. My heart had created a security system so strong that even love needed permission to enter. Sometimes our minds do that after emotional pain. Psychologists explain that the brain remembers painful experiences because it wants to protect us from future danger. It is a survival mechanism. But sometimes the same protection that keeps us safe also keeps us from experiencing happiness. I had to learn that trusting again was not ignoring the past. It was learning from the past without allowing it to control my future. During this time, my English practice became part of my healing. Every morning, I listened to slow English stories while making breakfast. I repeated sentences about courage, forgiveness, and hope. One sentence I loved was, "A new beginning starts with one small step." I realized that sentence was true for everything in life. When you learn a new language, you don't become fluent in one day. You learn one word, one sentence, one conversation at a time. When you rebuild trust, you do the same thing. One honest conversation. One promise kept. One small action repeated every day. Our children also notice the changes. They didn't need a perfect explanation. Children are often more sensitive than adults realize. They noticed that dinner conversations became happier. They noticed that Daniel listened more. They noticed that I smiled more. One night, my son looked at both of us and said, "It feels like our family is back." I smiled, but inside I knew something deeper. Our family wasn't back. It was different. Stronger because we understood how fragile love could be. Several months passed, and things slowly improved. But healing does not mean the past disappears completely. There was still one question I had never asked Daniel. A question I was afraid of because I didn't know if I could handle the answer. One evening, while we were sitting outside our home watching the sunset, I finally asked him, "Daniel, if you could go back to the day you left, would you still leave?" He became silent. His answer took several seconds. Then he looked at me and said something that changed the way I understood our entire story. "Yes, but not for the reason you think." The lesson after the tears. Have you ever wondered if the person who hurt you could also become the person who helps you heal? For months, I believed Daniel leaving was the worst thing that ever happened to me. I thought his goodbye destroyed our family. But sitting beside him under the evening sky, I heard an answer I never expected. His words made me realize that sometimes a painful ending is not the end of love. Sometimes it is the moment when two people finally stop pretending and start becoming honest. The sunset painted the sky above our neighborhood in soft orange and gold. The same streets where I once walked alone while carrying my sadness now felt completely different. Life had not become perfect. We still had bills, busy schedules, parenting challenges, and normal disagreements. But something important had changed. We were no longer two people trying to prove who was right. We were two people trying to protect what mattered most. When I asked Daniel, "Would you leave again if you could go back?" I expected him to say no. I expected him to say something comforting. Instead, he took a deep breath and said, "Yes, but not because I wanted to abandon you." I looked at him, confused. "Then why?" He looked at the ground for a moment before answering. "Because the man I was back then needed to face the consequences of his choices. If I stayed without changing, I would have continued hurting you in the same way." His answer surprised me. For a long time, I believed the opposite. I believed love meant staying no matter what. But I slowly learned that physical presence is not the same as emotional presence. Someone can sit beside you every day and still feel miles away. Someone can leave the room and later return as a completely different person. Daniel explained that the time apart forced him to understand something important. He didn't leave because our family was not valuable. He left because he didn't know how to handle his own pain. But learning that did not erase what happened. He still had to take responsibility. And I still had to decide whether my heart could open again. Forgiveness was not a magical moment where all my pain disappeared. It was more like learning a new skill. At first, every step felt uncomfortable. Every memory brought fear. Every promise needed time to become believable. But slowly, I learned that forgiveness is not about changing the past. It is about changing the power the past has over you. During this chapter of my life, I continued practicing English every morning. Sometimes people ask why I connect language learning with personal growth. The answer is simple. Learning a language teaches patience. You make mistakes. You repeat sentences. You forget words. Then one day, you realize you understand something that once felt impossible. Healing works the same way. You don't suddenly become okay. You practice being okay. You practice letting go. You practice believing again. One sentence from my English practice stayed in my mind. Progress is not about being perfect. It is about moving forward. That sentence became my reminder during difficult days. Daniel and I also learned a valuable lesson about American family life. Many people chase the idea of a perfect family, but real families are not perfect pictures on social media. Real families are people with different fears, different backgrounds, and different weaknesses trying to love each other better. The strongest families are not the ones without problems. They are the ones willing to face problems together. Months later, Daniel surprised me with a small gift. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't something you could buy in a luxury store. It was a simple wooden frame holding one of the old notes I had found in the box. Inside was the sentence he wrote when we first got married. "I choose you today, and I will choose you tomorrow." Underneath it, he added a new sentence. "Now I understand what choosing you really means." I read those words many times. Because years earlier, I thought love was about finding someone who would never hurt you. Now I understood something deeper. Love is about finding someone willing to grow after they hurt you. It is about two imperfect people choosing honesty over pride. It is about rebuilding trust one small action at a time. But just when I believed our story had finally reached a peaceful ending, Daniel came home one evening holding a small envelope. I immediately froze. After everything we had been through, envelopes still carried memories of pain. He noticed my expression and smiled gently. "Don't worry," he said. "This time, it is not goodbye." I slowly opened it. Inside was something I never expected, a document with my name on it. And when I read the first line, I realized Daniel had planned one final surprise that would change our family's future forever. Would you forgive? What if the person who broke your heart became the person who helped you discover your own strength? What if the goodbye you feared was actually the beginning of a transformation you never expected? When my husband left me, I thought my life had fallen apart. I thought our family story was over. But today, standing in the same home where I once cried alone, I understand something completely different. Sometimes people don't leave because they stopped loving you. Sometimes they leave because they are lost, and sometimes they return because they finally found themselves. I slowly opened the envelope Daniel gave me that evening. My hands were still nervous because for so long, envelopes had represented painful memories. The first one took my husband away. This one, however, brought something I never imagined. Inside was a document showing that Daniel had created a family project with our children. It was not about money. It was not about a new house or a big achievement. It was a promise to create more meaningful moments together. At the top of the page were 4 simple words, our family future plan. I looked at Daniel with surprise. You made this? I asked. He smiled. We spent so much time worrying about what we lost. I wanted us to start thinking about what we can build. As I read through the pages, I saw drawings from our children, ideas for family traditions, weekend activities, and goals we could achieve together. It was simple, but it meant everything. Because I finally understood the biggest change in Daniel wasn't that he came back. It was that he came back differently. He wasn't returning to continue the old marriage. He was returning to create a new relationship with me. A healthier one. A more honest one. A relationship where we could talk about difficult things instead of hiding them. Looking back at my journey, I realized something important. The hardest moments in life often teach us lessons we would never choose to learn. I didn't choose to experience my husband leaving. I didn't choose the loneliness, the questions, or the fear my children felt. But through that painful chapter, I discovered my own strength. I learned that I could stand on my own. I learned that my happiness could not depend completely on another person. And strangely, becoming stronger helped me love better. Many people misunderstand forgiveness. They think forgiveness means forgetting. It doesn't. I still remember the morning Daniel left. I still remember the pain. But those memories no longer control me. They became part of my story, not the ending of my story. Psychologists often explain that emotional healing happens when people are able to process painful experiences and create new meanings from them. We cannot always change what happened, but we can change the way we carry it. My English learning journey taught me the same lesson. When I started practicing slow English reading, I was afraid of making mistakes. I worried about pronunciation. I worried about speaking incorrectly. But every day I practiced a little more. I learned that improvement comes from consistency, not perfection. Life works the same way. A better relationship, a stronger family, and a more confident version of yourself are built through small steps repeated every day. Today, when I sit at the kitchen table and watch Daniel help our children with homework, I sometimes remember the woman I was when he left. She was broken. She was scared. She thought she would never smile the same way again. I wish I could go back and tell her something important. I would tell her, this pain is not the end. You are becoming someone stronger than you can imagine. Our family is not perfect. We still have difficult days. We still misunderstand each other sometimes. But now we know how to come back to the conversation.
We know how to say sorry.
We know how to listen. And most importantly, we know that love is not only about staying when everything is easy. Love is about choosing each other when life becomes complicated. So, would I forgive my husband? Yes. But not because I forgot what happened. I forgave him because I saw his effort, his honesty, and his change. And I also forgave myself for being angry, for being afraid, and for needing time to heal. If you are listening to this story today while facing your own difficult moment, remember this. A painful chapter does not mean your whole story is finished. Sometimes the person you become after the storm is the person you were always meant to be. And sometimes the greatest love story is not the one where two people never break. It is the one where they break, rebuild, and choose each other again. That is all for today. I will make many more stories like this in the future. Please subscribe to watch more similar videos.